Well, after today's session, I hope you will be armed with everything you need to release something as open source or at least public. Have you ever done anything with communication with radio? People often get what's called mic fright. Before Zoom, the Zoom microphone, you're scared to say something. I've seen the same thing with open source, is people are scared to release something. What if I screw it up? What if people don't like it? What if they're mean to me? And I hope today, after the next hour, hour and a half, that you feel really comfortable releasing something as open source and you feel like you can do it safely and correctly and in a way that a community can be built. And also that you work well with the open source community that you're using. We're all going to depend on open source when we build it. So perfect. I see Open Brewery DB, API dataset, really interesting form of open source or public content. We often think of source code or applications or apps as open source, but content, databases, images, icons, fonts, all of these things are something that's open content or shared, kind of a shared community. So that's great. And I always like these connections. Somebody saying, I've used your data set and API. That is awesome. Um, I do a lot of work with open source maintainers on big open source projects, and we have sessions just like this to teach them about security and licensing and open source, and you can always learn something. And it's amazing. People who are working on the same open source project, sometimes the first time they're meeting is on a Zoom session like this. Like, oh, we've been working together for 10 years. I've never actually seen your face. It's kind of
Yeah.
amazing how the open source world can work like that. So, great. Let's see what else we have.
Okay. Yeah.
Chicago. Perfect.
So Jeff, I think at any point now you can start sharing your screen. We're so thrilled to have you here today. It's a big, we've had a lot of people asking questions about open source and their projects. And in particular, this theme that we kind of keep returning to and keep hitting on about the building public evidence that one can point to during a job interview, during a conversation with a potential future employer or an organization you're interested in partnering with or working with, or potential colleagues or collaborators, and how you can talk about your past work in a way that's convincing and people can see the visual and public evidence of work and contributions that you've made. And so defining some of these terms, I think, will be helpful, but also gaining some familiarity with best practices around sharing your work, things to keep in mind, things to be aware of. For everybody who's joining from all the Hacker Summer builders, and if there's any mentors who are here today, feel free to use the chat here. I think you can also drop things into Discord. I'll keep an eye on that. Jeff's not in the Discord yet, but he's gonna be in there soon. So we'll use a combination today. And yeah, I'll hand it over to Jeff now. Thanks again so much.
Great. Thanks so much. Great for that intro. I really appreciate that. I am doing my sharing right now, and give me one second. I unfortunately clicked the sharing button that has swapped me. So give me one second here.
Sure, no problem. And for any of you who joined a little later, in the chat, if you want to drop in where you're joining us from physically today, I'm calling in from Montreal as usual, and any exposure or experience or times when you've either contributed to an open source project or a shared database, a shared public collection of data, anything like that, drop it into the chat, and yeah.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Give me one second here. I need to swap you out for my presentation. So give me one second.
No problem.
Okay. Do you see my slides right now? Open source licensing and security compliance?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. And is the chat hiding it for you, or is you're not seeing my chat? Okay,
No,
perfect.
we're not seeing your chat. No.
Great. Well, thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for the logistics here, and I'm really looking forward to talking with you today. My name is Jeff Luszcz, and I'm going to talk about open source licensing and security compliance. Big words for basically saying, how can I create something that share it with the world and allow people to use it safely, be a good community member, and hopefully and perhaps build a community around what I'm building. So, my name is Jeff Luszcz. Lots of Z's there. It's pronounced Luszcz. I work at GitHub. Been at GitHub for a little over about 2.5 years now. I'm in their OSPO, which is the Open Source Program Office. And my job at GitHub is to make sure that GitHub uses open source correctly. that we respect the licensing, the permissions, we keep good security practices, we're good maintainers, and also good users. If you look at companies and you look at software products today, probably 90 to 95% of any application you look at is actually written by open source authors. What people are doing, no matter how big the product is, it's 5% is written by employees of that company or people that you know. Everything else is basically gluing together Lego pieces of open source libraries, which is just really amazing. If you went back 30 years ago, it was opposite. People wrote 90% of a company's product and they bring little bits here and there. It's flipped around in the last couple decades here. If you want to get in contact with me, I'm on GitHub at Jeffrey-Luszcz and also on LinkedIn, which is perhaps the easiest way to get to me, JEFFLUSZCZ on LinkedIn, and love to connect with you. And we have chat here, and I'll be joining the Discord as well. A little bit about myself. I've been working with open source since the 90s. As a software programmer, I used to work at NASA. I did visual research and wrote scientific software, and that's where I really got my exposure to open source. Is when the internet started, starting to see what was possible with software tools, scientific tools, programming languages, etc. That's how I got a taste of understanding the security and the licensing worlds there. And ever since then, I've been dealing with open source. I actually started a company back in the early 2000s, ran that for about 16 years, which was a security and licensing protection product for open source. Basically, make sure you were using the right open source with the right permissions and that you weren't affected by security vulnerabilities, things like that. So if you have people have questions about starting a company, raising money as well, etc., love to help anybody out with that as well. I've also done a lot of work on the merger and acquisition side. So believe it or not, when a company, remember I said 95% of what a product is open source. When a big company buys another company or they onboard open source project that they want to hire the people for, they're going to look at that open source project and figure out, is it all put together right? Is it secure? Are they respecting the licenses and the copyrights, et cetera? I've done a lot of that work for merger and acquisition reviews over the last 15 or 20 years here. So also there's some things I can answer questions as well in chat as well. So let's hop right into this. What is this all about? You are going to spend some time. You're going to think about writing software. You're going to spend hours, days, weeks, months, years, perhaps, building something that you want to share with other people. Maybe because you want to get credit for it. It's good for your resume. Sometimes you really are excited about something. There, I saw somebody in the chat who built a database about brewery information and software, an API, which is basically, if you're not familiar with that term, basically a way of interacting with a software library to ask it questions. You're going to spend all this time. You want to get it right. You don't want people a year in or 5 years in and saying, you actually don't own it. Or you built your project on top of my project and I don't like what you're doing. And I'm going to make it so that you can't use it anymore. And this happens every day. People have disagreements about ownership. People have disagreements about licensing. Security problems happen. And you might be reading this in the news every day about another hack, another account takeover, another data leakage, et cetera. And as soon as you put pen to paper and you become a software author, you're responsible for these things. People are going to trust you with their data. People are going to trust you with their computer. When they download your open source project to their laptop, they're trusting that you're doing the right thing. So what we're going to learn today is how you can do that around your intellectual property and licensing, how you can do that around the security of your repository itself, and how you can help secure the product that you build. And so that you have fewer bugs and less vulnerabilities for your users. We'll spend about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll hit a break. I'll ask some questions. If you have any questions along the way, if it's appropriate, I'll try to answer it now. Otherwise, we'll wait toward the end. I'm also available on LinkedIn and hopefully on Discord soon enough to answer any questions you have. I'll leave you some checklists. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end. I'm going to give you a lot of data. Idea is that you just don't try to bring it in all right now, but I'll leave you the slides afterward so you have a good resource. So for afterward, you can do lookups, et cetera, and say, I think I remember something. So let's just hop right into it. So first thing, getting your license right. We'll talk about that. Knowing what you use. Remember, I said 95% of what you're going to build your project on is other people's work. How do you protect your repo? There are bad people out there who are trying to take over your account. And there's certain things that if you do, make it easier for them to take over your account or attack your users. And we'll hop into those things one by one. So first thing, what do we want? We want to share what we make. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about open source. You wouldn't be at the session today or this over the few weeks here. You would just be doing something else. You'd be at the beach. You'd be watching TV, whatever. We all are sitting here saying, I want to build something. I want to learn how to build something, and I want to learn how to share it. 6 billion people, 7 billion, 8 billion people in the world, billions and billions of people are on the internet. This is what's amazing about open source is I can today go to GitHub, someplace else on the internet, put some code up there, and tomorrow somebody can decide to use that in Madagascar, in Chicago, in France, Paris, whatever. Anywhere around the world, people can grab that. They want to share it. Um, but you want to give them the right permissions. You don't want to do a rug pull and say, oops, sorry, I actually couldn't give you what I thought I could give you. It's a little bit like writing an article for a newspaper. You just wouldn't copy something from Wikipedia in your article and call it yours. People trust that what you're writing is yours or that you have the permissions to put it in. And we want to use other people's projects. We want to respect this open source community, the hundreds of millions of people that are out there on the internet sharing what they build. And we want to do it safely. Like I said, you don't want to get attacked yourself, and you don't want to have the people who trust you to get attacked. And this is all wrapped up in basically best practices around open source licensing, security, and repository safety. So let's first talk about licensing. And I'm not a lawyer. We're all not lawyers here, maybe a lawyer, but which would be great. So don't take this as legal advice. Take this perhaps a little bit as conventional wisdom or some places to start. But the general idea is when you build open source, you need to have a clear license for anybody else in the world to use it and for you. So all software and other assets, you might make an image, an icon, a font, a sound, song, whatever it is. Anything that you put out there or that you are bringing in from someplace else needs to have a clear license in order to be used, and especially in an open source project. So if you're building the next great web browser or AI project or whatever it may be, you need to make sure all the Lego pieces that you're pulling together and you're putting inside your repository, that they all are compatible, that they all connect together with the licensing, and that everything has a license. If something doesn't have a license, that person can come to you in a year or 10 years, et cetera, and say, oh, you know what? You owe me $1 million. Or, oh, you got to give all that code away for free because my license is actually this viral copyleft license, which I'll mention in a little bit. And now you got to decide whether you're going to do that or close your project down. And this happens every day. This happens to large commercial companies. It happens to individuals. You can go out to the internet and just see really crazy long battles over licensing and who wrote what. This is also a big problem for co-maintainers. So you might work with someone and say, oh, we're going to build something together. And just like being a roommate, a year or two or three down the line, somebody's not washing the dishes right, and you have a big fight, and somebody says, I own this project. No, I own this project. And these are things that if you don't get right at the very beginning, can lead to problems down the line. So let's hop right into why we care. So there's a couple pillars to licensing and copyright, et cetera, out there that are the underpinnings of open source. Basically, open source exists because of copyright law. Back in the late 70s, early 80s or so, people started thinking about how can I share source code? How can I share software in this newfangled network, the internet, when it came up? When there were dozens to maybe hundreds of universities and companies out there, people are sharing code on tapes and floppies and things like that. You used to have to call somebody or literally write them a postal letter and say, I'd like to use your software. I'd like to use your software. And you wait for weeks and then either get permission or maybe never get permission. People said, this isn't great. What if we could figure out some sort of hack to make it automatic? And that's where open source licensing came from. Somebody says, you know what, we'll use copyright law and these fancy things called text files, and we'll write a short message that basically says, you don't have to call me up on the phone. As long as you do A or B or C, and you don't do E and F and G, you have my permissions to use my source code, my database, my fonts, whatever it may be. So copyright law is the basis of all of this. And we live in a very wide world. There is different copyrights all around, copyright law all around the world. And the more you do in the open source world and the commercial world, the more you have to pay attention to that. But in general, we've been fairly lucky that in the open source world, we've been able to kind of come up with this convention around these open source licenses that allows us to really have a great conversation. Say, you know what? I want to use your code. I'm willing to do this. Great. We don't have to have a longer conversation. There's also new legislation out there. So you may have heard of in the EU, there's the Cyber Resilience Act. This is this new legislation that's affecting companies all around the world and potentially some individuals that talk about, hey, if you're using open source, you need to tell people what open source you're using. That's through a mechanism called a software bill of materials, basically a list of what you're shipping to people. And you have to pay attention to the vulnerabilities. So if something is hacked or has a potential weakness, you have to fix it, maybe within 24 hours. And so people are, especially if you're selling products in the EU, are very aware now of all the open source they're using, and they have to pay attention to the licensing, and they have to disclose it to their users. And if you're using the wrong thing, you get in trouble. Your users say, wait a second, you told me you're using X and that's the wrong license. What are you doing? Do you know what you're doing? You're getting me in trouble. So that's a big thing right now. The community is very aware. So sometimes the community will come and say, hey, you're doing the wrong thing. Hey, you're doing this. Where's the license? Or you're using this project, but you're not giving me the source code. The more popular you get, the more eyeballs are on your code and your project, the more the community is going to help you do the right thing. And typically it's not going to be aggressive unless you're being a jerk or really fighting it. But in general, you should be prepared. You know, the community is going to help you out. And your end users may not be the community. They literally may just be somebody at some business that downloaded you. They don't want to be a part of your community. They just want to use your project. And if they find a problem, maybe that's a vulnerability, maybe that's a licensing problem, maybe that's some incompatibility or whatever, they're going to yell at you. Sometimes nicely, sometimes not so nicely. It's good to understand how you're going to work with the community. It's good to understand how you're going to work perhaps with some prickly people before you start working on open source, just to kind of prepare yourself. I would say 99% of people are good, and you never have to suffer any jerks, though sometimes even jerks have important information for you, whether it's vulnerability, security, licensing problems. So this is the community you're going to work with. It's not just a random hobbyist. It is the largest companies in the world, the largest governments in the world, all the way down to a literal elementary school student who happens to download your code and finds a problem. So let's talk about licensing. So, and I see some questions here that I'll get to in just a minute. There are four major types of licensing, and I'll start at the top and we'll go deeper and deeper. And at a certain point, you can shut your brain off and say, I've had enough, and then we'll continue on. But you will have access to this when things get tough for you, when you build bigger and bigger projects, or if you start to work with commercial companies. There are four major things you should pay attention to. The first one I talk about is the public domain. And a lot of us have perhaps heard of the public domain. It's sometimes these magic words. Oh, it's okay. I don't have to worry about it. I downloaded it from the internet. It's public domain. More often than not, when people say that, they're misunderstanding what happened. They just downloaded something from the internet. They didn't look for licensing. They thought since they could grab it, they could download it, they must have permissions to use it. And that is probably the most important thing to learn from today's session is very few things can just be downloaded from the internet and used without looking deeper. That's how you can get yourself in trouble. That's how you can get your project not used. more often than not, they're going to have a real license, a named license that we'll talk about in a second. And if people are saying, oh, it's public domain, you should really poke on them a little bit and say, what do you mean? Are you sure? Public domain means no obligations. Don't worry about it. Um, fairly rare, though it's often the most commonly thing people are going to mention when they're talking about licensing and downloading things from the internet. You see this all the time where companies get in trouble where they download a picture off the internet, a photograph, and they put it in some advertising. And the person who put that photograph up on the internet says, wait a second, that's my photo. You didn't have permission. Oh, well, I thought I could just download it from the internet. If you put it on the internet, I could use it. Nope. Just like for photographs, you can't do that. Same thing for source code. The most common licensing types that are out there are going to be these licenses that are people called attribution style licenses. And the general idea here is give credit where credit's due. Maybe in your documentation, maybe in an about box, maybe in a copyright notices file. If you've ever been kind of stuck and you're bored and you have your phone and you're clicking around in general and you see the legal notices or about this application and you click and you see all this legal text with capital letters and disclaimers and copyright symbols, that's the attribution. That's where these companies and open source projects are giving credit where credit is due. Each one of those little sections represents an open source project. And any application you're using probably depends on hundreds, if not thousands, and sometimes tens of thousands of other people's open source projects from a GitHub repository, just like hopefully you'll be building by the end of these sessions here. General idea is you pass along the copyright, copyright Jeff Luszcz or copyright 2026, Jane Smith. You pass along that message and whatever legal text came along with it. That's the license text. The next type you'll see is called copyleft. And this is a really amazing idea. If you've ever used Linux, if you've ever used the MySQL database, you have used an open source project that has a copyleft style license. And this was a really interesting concept that came out in 1988, 1989. People from the Free Software Foundation were writing some software and they said, you know what? It's a problem that source code becomes invisible. Somebody builds a commercial product, they build an application and they give it to you. And yeah, it's fine and good that if you're giving me credit, it says copyright Jeff in it. But if I don't have the source code, I don't know what you're doing. I can't fix it. I can't improve it. And they came up with this idea of copyleft. And the idea there is if you deliver software, distribute software with a copyleft style license, you must pass on all the source code. And if somebody else grabs it from me and makes an improvement or a change, and they start distributing a project based on that, they need to give all their source code away. So nothing is hidden. Nothing is secret anymore. Everything is visible. So copyleft is kind of a pun on copyright. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why Linux has become so popular is because you can't keep your Linux improvements hidden. You ship a product, a router, computer, whatever it may be, a light bulb these days have Linux inside of it, and you've improved it, you have to share all of that source code with the community. And every day it gets better and better, and more bugs get fixed, and improvements get fixed. And that's just an amazing thing. So that's copyleft, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And there's some copyleft that is just the little bits. Oh, just this library. I want you, if you make an improvement to this library, you give the little pieces away for the library or the whole project, like Linux. And there's different licenses that basically say everything has to be given away, or just the library has to be given away, or if you've changed a file, that one file has to be given away. And that's the different flavors of copyleft. Really important, probably the main reason we're talking today is because if you don't get copyleft right, people do get upset with you. It's kind of seen as a copyright violation, a license violation. If you especially are a commercial company and you're not doing the right thing around copyleft code, you make the front page of the newspaper. There's been some very large lawsuits over the years, multi-$100 million acquisitions where they've had to release all the source code. This a very famous case was many years ago where Cisco bought the Linksys brand. And Linksys had used Linux as the basis of their routers and wasn't releasing the source code. And the community basically worked with Cisco to get that all of that source code released to the public. And that's why to this day you can get Tomato router and WRT54 routers, etc., for free online. Okay. And lastly, and then I'll get some questions here, kind of proprietary licenses, commercial licenses, or quasi-proprietary. And um, idea here is people make one-off licenses. You know, you go download some weird PDF app and you see that EULA, that click-through thing, and that's probably just their code, just their license. Nobody else in the world is reusing that license. And you have to really pay attention to that, especially if you're going to be using that module and reuse it in your code. So, okay, and I see here somebody had asked, why did company code bases move to including majority open source if there could be more vulnerabilities or license conflicts? And that's a really great question. I think if we thought about it ahead of the time, people would say, I can't trust it. It's coming from the internet. Who are these people? But what happens in practice is the open source world very often ends up being more secure. There is this feeling that there's more eyeballs on it. You're able to actually look at the source code, either trust that the community has done the right thing or use your own security tools on it. Also, just that, like I said, there are billions and billions of people in the world, and there are hundreds of millions of people with GitHub logins and people building source code every day. Uh, if you have an itch, somebody scratched it. You know, if you want a library to reverse the letters of a string, or you want special buttons that look like wood, someone has made an open source library. Anything you can imagine, people have made a library for already, and may have dozens or hundreds or thousands or millions of users who have kind of worked on it and broke it and fixed it and changed it and added to it. And it's just people found that it was easier. I would also say that if you've ever worked in a large company, working with procurement to get even like a $50 check written to buy a book is really painful. But I can go out to GitHub or a repository and download source code today without really asking any permission. I think just developers routed around commercial contracts and just found themselves building this amazing shared resource. There's problems with the shared resource that we'll get to it at the end of this presentation around security and trust, but it's a really amazing thing just to see. So, and I think as time goes on, we'll see maybe a little more change where people say, well, can I trust it as much as I did 10 years ago, especially with some hacks and things like that? I think in general, though, people do trust open source. We'll have to improve some of the security practices to make it more trustworthy, but I don't see us going back towards 90% commercial again, 90%. And so somebody asked, is copyleft kind of the same as sampling in music production? I sample a lot of my music productions, and there are tricky rules to it. Would be kind of an analog. I would say it's very similar. Using open source in general is a lot like sampling. That famous quote, everything is a remix. I think that's true even in the software world. People go out and they download libraries, they snippets, icons, photos, all this together, and they mix it all together in a big stew. And keeping the rights, understanding the rights and what you've put together in your big stew is what allows you to keep shipping it and distributing it. If we see all the time in kind of sampled music where somebody doesn't clear the rights correctly and it leads to a lawsuit or not having that song available anymore. I think I may get this wrong, forgive me, but I think was it Men at Work had been sued a few years ago over the one of the refrains in one of their famous songs because it was potentially based on like a campfire song that was still under copyright, and they may have lost lots of royalties based on that. I forget quite the specifics, but there's a lot of stories like that. It's a great analog for the software world. If you don't get your samples right, and you don't give credit where credit's due, and you don't look to the obligations, your final work, your song, your application, etc., will not hang together. So, and somebody says, what about Google Materials? I'm not quite familiar what Google Materials are, but anything that big companies put out there, like for images, for like photo databases, etc., It's really important to look at the copyright and the license, and also just be very careful because sometimes people pull together stuff as these big databases of collections, and they might not care as much as you do about the licensing, et cetera. And they might even do like a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Look, I've put this all together for you. And they've made this big stew. And but they've done is they've basically taken other people's stuff and other people's stuff and other people's stuff and put it into a big database, big download file server. Um, always check for it. And if it's super important, especially if it's the basis of your project, like if you removed it, your whole thing would fall apart. You want to spend some extra time making sure you got it right. If it's like a little thing on the side, do your due diligence. But especially if it is the underpinning of your entire project, you want to make sure it's you're doing the right thing. So great, really great questions. Thanks for that. So I'm gonna put the chat over to the side and
Yeah, Jeff, I just did a
yep.
quick search, and it looks like Google Materials are like a set of icons and images that Google has put together. It looks to me like they're available through a Creative Commons license.
Great.
Just to
Perfect. And that's a great, and that is, I always like having the lead up to the next section here. So Creative Commons licenses they're its own sessions. We'll talk about that. I love them, but they have some things you got to pay attention to. So now we've named some licenses. You are going to see these letters, these acronyms every day of your life for the rest of your life if you're in the software world. So get familiar with them. I would say the letters, the license names we see on the page right now, these are going to be 90% of what you use. These are the names of the licenses, and I put them into basically the kind of the columns of from like the easiest to reuse with the least obligations to on the right hand side the most obligations that may affect your desired use. So every license is going to have a disclaimer that basically says don't sue me. And everybody on the call today probably doesn't want to get sued because they put something on the internet. So when you release content, you almost certainly want to have some sort of disclaimer that says, "Hey, I'm doing this because I'm trying to help you out. Please don't take my house. Please don't take my car." So you can't always disclaim everything, but it doesn't hurt to have that in your license. All the open source licenses in general that you see are going to have some sort of disclaimer. The first column of like the licenses that you're going to see every day, the BSD license, the MIT license, the Apache software license. These basically just say, pass along the copyright notice, pass along the license text, it's kind of legal block, and don't delete any of the copyrights or license text, etc. If it's there, leave it there. If you are using anything from NPM, um, most of the stuff from the NPM repository for JavaScript is under the MIT license. If you're a Java person and you're getting things from the Apache software project, they're under an Apache license. If you're in the some of the operating systems, like the BSD operating system world, BSD. Different ecosystems have different licenses. They all kind of look very similar because they were kind of evolutionary. Everything eventually starts to look like a crab, they say, evolutionary. All licenses kind of start to look the same if they're filling the same ecological niche. We then get into the idea of copyleft, which is, hey, if you're using this and you improve it or you fix something, you have to let everybody have those improvements. And that's what we call copyleft. And this idea of weak copyleft and strong copyleft and network copyleft. And what that basically means is weak copyleft is either the file or the library has to be shared. Strong copyleft, like the general public license, or something the GPL says, in for a penny, in for a pound. If you use any little bit of GPL licensed code and you distribute that to somebody else, a project based on that, you need to give the whole project away under the terms of the GPL. That could be surprising for people. That was very surprising when that large company bought that smaller company and they had to give the whole operating system away for free. That was probably not in their plans to do, but it was the only way for them to keep that hardware product moving forward. You may find if you didn't plan correctly, that might be the only way to keep your software project working. You may decide that copyleft is what you want. If you're building something like Linux, or you're building like a new database or something like that, you may want to require everybody to share their improvements. And I think that's another big thought today when we hang up today at the end of the day is what philosophy do I have around the software that I'm building? Do I just care about credit? Do I think that maybe keeping it easy allows it to be shared the most? Do I want everybody to have to share the source code to everybody? That's probably the difference between MIT or picking the GPL. And then when the internet got involved, uh, people found out, oh my gosh, what if I put this on a website and I want building a software as a service project, and I also want people to have to share the source code if they improve it. That's where this AGPL license came from. Um, if you're doing any development work professionally and you're at a large company, typically the GPL and the AGPL licenses cause heartburn for large companies. And they typically want to keep their projects proprietary, closed source. They don't want to have to share the source code for anything. They may have internal policies that say no GPL libraries allowed, no AGPL software allowed, or only under these cases. And we can talk about that offline, we can think, et cetera. But this is one slide. If you're a software developer professionally, understanding these columns will make your job a lot easier because you have a lot of choices. You can pick a software library under this license or that license. And if you pick the wrong one and you do a whole week of work or a whole month of work, and then you check it in and your manager says, we can't use this, you picked the wrong license, not a good use of your time. So here's a little cheat sheet. Typically, you'll find a lot of folks are deferring to like MIT or Apache or BSD, except for certain cases.
And Jeff, in the case that where most of the participants who have been building their personal projects, trying to build out evidence in a sort of
Yep.
portfolio-like way of here's what I
Yep.
can build. I guidance on how to navigate licenses for that, but also as a sort of parallel question, a lot of people as like Dan was running a whole session last week on using Copilot to help build out applications. He's going to be back in a little over an hour to do
Yep.
more of the
Yep.
same. When you're thinking about using generative tools to support the software development that you're working on as an individual,
Yep.
so leaving like the use case aside where you're working for a company and maybe somebody there will tell you the answer
Yep. Yep.
but
Yep.
for
Yep.
your
Yep.
own
Yep. Yep.
projects is like navigating that element or using tools like that to check for dependencies. Do you have any?
Mhm.
I was wondering if you have
Yep.
some thoughts on
And I have
that.
a couple slides on that in just a little bit, but I
Okay,
think
perfect, great. I'm just continuing to set you up for future speakers.
perfect. I love it. It's perfect. It really helps.
Great.
The general idea is know what you're using. Know what you're using and then understand what your philosophy is. I would say most people today, if you say, I'm going to pick an MIT license for my project, my personal project, you might want to tell Copilot, um, my project is licensed under the MIT license. Only select dependencies that are compatible with the MIT license. Um, you also sometimes get to chat with Copilot and say, where I am right now, find anything in my dependencies that might not be compatible with the MIT license, and it might tell you. And it's pretty good at having a conversation about licensing, about dependencies, et cetera. It sometimes doesn't have the complete visibility to all of your dependencies, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But in general, it's pretty good. It's so much better than it was even 2 years ago or a year ago. So great question. Thanks for setting me up. I'm just going to do this really quickly here, just because I often talk about licenses, and then afterward people say, I don't know what a license looks like, or what's a license? This is a software license. This is the MIT license. This is the most popular license in the world. Probably 70 to 80% of all open source in the world is under this license. And it's pretty short and sweet. It basically just says you can do anything you want with it, free of charge, any person. Basically, you can use, copy, modify, merge, publish, distribute, sublicense, and or sell, and et cetera, et cetera, as long as the above copyright notice and this permission notice shall be included in all copies or substantial portions of the software. Basically, give credit where credit's due is what that's saying. And then that big, almost the whole license is that disclaimer. Please don't take my house. Please don't take my car, et cetera. So this is a software license. You don't need to understand the specifics of it in general. You just need to know, is this an MIT license? Is this a BSD license, GPL? And if you can't figure it out, that's often a sign that it's probably not something you should be using. If you can't make heads or tails of it, or if it doesn't say I'm one of these well-known, well-used open source licenses, it's probably a commercial license, probably a proprietary license. Might be free, but it may limit your ability to reuse it for people. If you want to dig through it, you might be able to figure it out, maybe with some help. But in general, short and sweet and common licenses are probably the best thing to do to keep yourself just on the straight and narrow. Okay. And you'll have access to these slides, and I've annotated, the kind of names for this here. Couple of things just as you're building your own products. And if you don't find yourself on the straight and narrow and you find yourself for whatever reason using some open source technology that has some weird licenses or one-off licenses, some things that you should watch out for. I'd say the biggest thing that you'll see is no commercial use, especially with some of the Creative Commons content. It'll say something like Creative Commons attribution, I mean, give credit where credit's due, no commercial use, or NC. And that may be fine if you're just doing a one-off project or portfolio project, etc. But in general, I would stay away from things marked not for commercial use because nobody else in the world will find it easy to use, even if they're not working for charging money for it, etc. I'm working at a commercial company. If I want to download it and use it, is that commercial use? I don't know. There's a lot of a gray zone around it, but there's a lot of code that's out there that's marked not for commercial use. Probably one of the biggest things I see when people are trying to like clean up open source projects for greater reuse is auditing and removing all that non-commercial use stuff. So just keep your eyes out for that. Especially lately, I've seen more projects saying not for military use or not use in a certain country or a company. You may find yourself at a company that's one of those companies being, said not for use by project A or in company B. Just keep your eye out for those types of things. It very often is a sign that you're going to find yourself in some big political fight on the internet, which nobody has time for. So, you may see some weird licenses, buy me a beer license, good, do good, not evil. Almost certainly you'll see that in your career. One of the most popular JSON libraries out there says, I don't have a license, just do good, not evil. We hope we're all doing good. You'll also see some anti-AI licenses and some ethical source licenses, that basically say this cannot be used at a company or a government that is doing bad practice A or B. Again, people often will maybe stay away from those because you don't know what that's going to do to your user community, or you may find that that's exactly what you want to do. But just something I think you'll see probably a couple times a year as you're choosing which libraries to include in your projects. So let's talk, and then we'll move on. And the reason I'm spending some time on this is because you will see these names, and you'll have to decide whether this should go in your project or not. Genevieve mentioned the Creative Commons, and this is a great project and ecosystem. They basically decided a couple years ago, a couple decades ago, maybe even now, to make a series of licensing. They saw how popular open source licensing was in the source code world, and they said we should do the same thing for the non-source world. Images, icons, documents, poems, songs, etc., videos. They need some licenses too that are appropriate for that type of content as opposed to source code. So they created these Creative Commons licenses. And if you remember those columns I had before, attribution, copyleft, strong, weak, etc. Creative Commons did the same thing. They said, we're going to make a series of licenses that just say, give credit where credit's due. That's known as the attribution licenses, also known as Creative Commons CC BY, CC BY. Very common for documentation, very common for images, icons, and songs. But they also said, well, some people like the copyleft, also known as viral. Some people want stuff to be always shared. And they created the share alike license. So Creative Commons share alike, CCSA. That basically says if you bring this into your project and you make a poster, for example, or a song, somebody asked about sampling before, expectation is you're going to relicense or license your song or your poster also under that share alike license so that everybody else can build upon and build upon and build upon your work. So just keep that in mind. If somebody says, "Oh, it's a Creative Commons license," that's not good enough. You need to hear those extra letters. You need to hear that extra section because there is such a wide range in, oh, just give me credit or this or share everyone. And they also give you the ability to add on that non-commercial -NC to all the licenses. So you might see Creative Commons attribution, so CC by -NC, not for use for commercial. And no commercial company is going to be able to use that. And you probably should, in my opinion, you probably should stay away from that if you want other people to use that or if you're building it inside your portfolio, et cetera. There's so much other content that's out there. You should be able to find something. So these are the most common ones you'll see. They've been broken up into those kind of standard attribution, weak copyleft, strong copyleft, network copyleft, and those full names and kind of the various acronyms that you'll see. So great to see. Keep that as a cheat sheet. And I'm just going to look real quickly here at the thing. So no new updates to the chat. So you are now ready to start building projects, start building open source, etc. So you are now you can have your licensing together for what you're building and what other code you're going to be using. What's happened in the last couple of years is people have been trying to figure out business models for open source. How do I become the next billion-dollar company? I'm open, somebody says, why is everything open source these days? Well, it's a trust thing. I want to be able to see the source code. I want to be able to use it. I want to trust that you're not going to do a rug pull and, maybe your company shuts down. I still want the ability to use your software, that library that you gave me. I might be thinking in decades. I'm building an airplane. I need to have access to that software for 50 years or 100 years legitimately. Aircraft companies are thinking in those timeframes. Automotive companies are thinking in, I'm driving a car that's 18 years old. The software needs to be updated and updatable. And if I don't have open source licensing, I can't trust that. But people, companies, organizations are saying, "Oh, I want to make some money." So you're starting to see these new licenses. They're not open source, but they look a lot like open source. It gets a little confusing. You will see this also where companies who are famously open source, pure open source for 10 years, 15 years, and they suddenly change the license. They say, we're no longer open source. We're source available, which sounds like open source, but it has restrictions. And you might say, well, I'm not affected by these restrictions. I don't care. It's okay. But some of the large companies you work with might be. And the reason that these licenses are changing is people want business model. They want to make more money. They also see sometimes that large companies are doing things like hosting their software, hosting their open source and reselling that hosting. Name some big cloud company that might be hosting a database. And the open source database might say, why aren't we making that money? Why is cloud provider A or B making that money? They've made these licenses, server-side public license, business source license, or these one-off licenses. I just add this here because this is a very controversial thing in the open source world. You may find yourself accidentally picking one of these very popular, it's very common in the database world. And just whenever you're picking your dependencies and things like in the database world or the search world, like the text search world, you may find yourself with these kind of one-off or source available licenses. And you may just find yourself having to be a realist and say, well, I guess we're going to pick this. You may need to find yourself having to pay some money in the future. You may need to have a plan B. If you're working with a large company that's affected by this license, you might say, well, we support this database, but also this other database. You often, I think in the open source world, you often have to be thinking about your plan Bs. What happens if this library disappears? What if this license changes? What if our biggest customer now can't use it? And so be aware of these things. Okay. So let's talk about not just the legal side, but let's talk about being a good open source citizen. You need to give credit where credit's due. That might be a text file in your repository that says, thank you to these open source authors, A through Z. There's some great examples. If you use Chrome, if you go to the Chrome / credits, or you go to your about box, go on your phone, go on whatever software you're using. Very often, if you go to the about box, you'll see something that'll say open source and it's a blue link, or software used, or software licenses, etc. You click on it. This is the one for Chrome. This is them doing that legal compliance, fulfilling their obligations to give credit where credit's due. And they're going to do this from A to Z. There's a whole bunch of different ways to do it. In general, my feeling is, you can do it perfectly, you can do it good enough, you can do it better than good enough. But you got to do something. You want to keep track of what you're using. You want to keep track of the licensing. There's some great open source projects that help you do this automatically for free. And the more popular you get, the more likely you're going to have to do this. And you may find yourself eventually where somebody will log a bug against your project and saying, you're not doing the right thing around your open source disclosures or your third-party notices. Boom. I will take that as perhaps as a sign that you're successful. You've made the big time, that people are looking, they want to use you. They're a big company or they're a big user, and they want to, they need to see the right open source obligations kind of being fulfilled so that they can reuse you. So great one to use. Apple, if you have an iPhone, go to your general about this phone and you'll see it, etc. Great place to do it. A lot of the GitHub tools have these. Will deliver a text file called third-party licenses or third-party notices.txt, and it's just a megabyte of all those licenses that we talked about. Okay, so just kind of moving forward, you may find, it'd be super easy if things were easy. Oh, it's just an MIT license. Oh, it's just a GPL license. I talked a little bit before about different ecosystems. Also talked about how people are looking for business models. These are two reasons why you might have multiple choices of licenses for the libraries that you're using. They might say, oh, you can use it under this copyleft license. Or guess what? If you don't want to do that, you can pay us money and we'll give you a commercial license. It's a very common business model for open source, which is make a very strong copyleft license so people won't use it, but they can buy their way out of the GPL or buy their way out of the AGPL license. Sometimes seen as kind of a hammer. It's often depending on developers not knowing what they're doing and then building a whole product around it and then finding out, oh boy, our only way to legally ship this is to pay money. Again, you see this very often in the databases, et cetera. Just something to keep in mind. Might be a good business model for you. Might be something that you, as when you're working on commercial projects, have to pay attention to, especially, like I said, for things like databases or other tools. But more and more companies and more open source projects are starting to think about monetizing their open source and are trying to figure out ways of doing it. Having a dual license is a really common way to do that. Makes things a little complicated. General idea is they give you two or more licenses that you can pick one. Hopefully you see one that's compatible with your desire. Okay. You do need to think about how you're shipping software. If I am putting something on a cell phone, mobile app, that's a distribution. That's the right-hand side. That's the classic open source license concern. I'm distributing something on a phone or on a piece of hardware or an installer on a desktop. All the licenses basically have opinions about distribution use, and you have to know every piece of software you're using. You have to know every license. You have to do all the compliance, etc. If you're, quote, just building a SaaS site, a lot of the open source licenses are silent on SaaS sites because you're actually not doing a distribution. You're just putting it out there on the internet, on a .com and running a service. So many of the licenses that we talked about today don't apply. The AGPL is the one that most likely will. You have to pay attention to that. And that's why it exists, is because they saw that hole occur. And commercial licenses, big database company, famous database company, they don't care if you're shipping software or not shipping software. If you're running a database, they want their money. So think about that. And then internal use. If I'm just building something for my home use or something at a commercial internal company use, I don't put it on the internet, I don't set up a SaaS site, I don't distribute it, open source licenses don't care about that use. That's for your internal use, et cetera. Pretty much do anything you want. I will say the problem with that is really useful tools that are built for internal use have a way of becoming software products or distributed. And if you don't do it right from the very beginning, you'll lose you're gonna have to do a lot of rework, et cetera. And you kind of find at the last moment that oh, we can turn this into a product. Oh, we can't because we have a licensing problem and it's too hard to fix. So I always, in my opinion, always think that you're going to distribute it. Oh, in general, think about what is the best case or the worst case for licensing. Okay.
Jeff, with half an hour left, I just
Yep.
want to
Yep.
check in on how like how everyone's feeling. If there's more questions, people should feel free to drop them into the chat, either here or on Discord, and I'll surface them here. And yeah, if you wanted to, I'm not sure how. Just yeah, a little water break maybe.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, I'll.
Okay. And I'm about to get into the security side of things. So licensing, we did a bunch of time on licensing because it's the underpinning of open source. If you get it wrong, you're not open source, you've wasted a lot of time, or you've gotten your user community in trouble. So in general, know what you have, know what's licensing. I have a nice little diagram here to talk about how people get themselves in trouble. The most common one is a direct dependency. Oh, I want to use this database. I want to use this image tool. Oh, I look at it. Oh, it's GPL. Okay, that's clear to me. I won't use it. Easy to fix, but also very, very visible. The, the magic words that you will hear a lot is transitive. You may not have heard that before, but the general idea is I might pull in a database. That database pulls in 100 other open source dependencies. Those are transitive dependencies. You'll sometimes people hand wave as, oh, it's a transitive dependency. I don't care about it. I always joke that another word for a transitive dependency is a dependency. You are responsible for everything you ship. You know, if I was building cake mix, if I was selling cake mix and I said, oh, chocolate chip cookie, chocolate chips, they're chocolate chips. I don't care about what's in the, oh, and it's got, you know, peanuts in the chocolate chips, or it's got poison in it, or whatever's in the salad right now. People care about your distribution. I think it's also for great analogies, the real world analogies of like food recalls, the real world analogies of sampling in in songs. Keep that in mind. Whatever happens there happens in the software world, almost exactly word for word. Something's poisoned, something's broken, something's not correct from a licensing perspective. And you are taking responsibility on when you build something and you pull in one thing that pulls in 100 other things. You know, it's like you invite somebody to a party and they bring 10 of their friends and they break your TV. Well, guess what? You're going to be upset with your friend. You're also going to be upset that you let those people in and you didn't, you know, didn't kick them out, or you didn't know that they've broken TVs at 10 other people's houses. So let's now talk about everything else real quickly. We talk about source code. We talk about dependencies, images, icons, sounds, fonts, containers, Docker. You have to pay attention to these things. Very often people say, "Oh, I didn't know. I had to worry about the songs. I didn't have to worry about the icons." If whether it's software, images, icons, etc., just keep in mind, figure out what that license is. It's coming from Google, whatever that was. Look at the license. Figure out what your license is. Figure out what the other license is. If they're compatible, great, use it. If they're not compatible, move on. Okay. So let's now talk about being successful. You right now maybe are working on these projects all by yourself. That's great. You know, you're working with Copilot, you're working all by yourself, whatever it is, you're building something, it's getting bigger, it's getting bigger, it's bigger. Then magically someday somebody sends you a text message or an email or something says, I love your stuff. I want to help you work on it. I got some ideas for fixing it. I got some ideas for improving it. You suddenly have a co-maintainer. Or maybe they're just doing a drive-by contribution. They're going to give you a pull request. They're going to give you a little code here. You now have somebody else's copyrighted code in your project. You now have a co-maintainer or a contributor. And it's really important to get it. If you accept code from somebody outside and don't know what the license is, or you change your license, you may find yourself, especially if you get wildly successful, you may find yourself having to go back in time and track that person down and either remove their code or relicense it, et cetera. So in general, pick a good license for your repository from the very beginning. Don't accept any code from the outside until you have a good license. And there's some things you can do around licensing. Basically, if you're on GitHub, what's nice is by default, any pull request that comes in is licensed under your current license. So if your repository has a nice MIT license, Apache license, GPL license, all those contributions are going to come under that license. Really good thing to start off with before you start taking outside contributions. Helps things relicense. If you ever think you're going to try to build a commercial product around what you're building, you might want to have an eye toward the inbound licensing to make sure you're not forcing yourself always to be, say, copyleft or whatever. So just to have such problems in some ways. But as you start thinking about the future, think about your licensing. Okay. I will say one of the biggest problems in fixing acquisitions and people's open source projects, et cetera, is founder problems, just like your roommate problems. And these early contributions where they're so early, they're so foundational to the project, it's almost impossible to pull them out. And so if big dollars are involved or big credit is involved or who owns the project is involved, you want to get that right. Okay. So to round things out here, we talked about getting the licensing right. Now we want to understand vulnerabilities and what you're using. You're going to hear this term, if you haven't already, over and over in the next couple of years. Software bill of materials, SBOMs, SBOMs, SBOMs. There are billion-dollar companies out there right now building software products to help you manage this. And the reason is because open source won. 95% of all the code in the world right now is somebody else's code running. It's open source code. It's out there. It's great, but it has vulnerabilities. All code has bugs. And if bugs are of a certain type, they have vulnerabilities. People can use that to break into your database, your bank, your health hospital, etc. So this whole idea of knowing what you have, knowing what its license is, and knowing if there's any known vulnerabilities, and within 24 hours, pushing out an update that fixes that bug as it's found. This is the rest of our lives, is basically updating open source projects, updating versions, having the tools, the scanners run and say, oh, you're using using a broken version of this code editor. Your PDF module is broken. Update, update, update for the rest of our lives. SBOMs is what allows us to do this. A lot of the legislation in the EU and in Asia is saying you have to know what you're shipping. In the US, we have this all over the place as well. And what is it? Basically, it's a component name, library name, its version, and maybe its license. And you will see this over and over and over and over and over again. Oh my gosh, look, this database is broken. You had to update it. How did people break in? Oh, they used this version of this Apache project. You might have remembered a couple years ago, there was like the log4j vulnerability that everybody's bank had to deal with within a day or two, struts, etc. Every day there's another vulnerability, and that's why these SBOMs are so useful. You will find out, and the reasons why, license conflicts, compliance, vulnerabilities, or that you're depending on something that's dead, hasn't been updated in 10 years. You probably should not be trusting yourself and your users to a dead project. So really important to know what you're using, find out all this information. There's great tools to help you with it. And one of the things is, you have an SBOM, you're using all this other stuff. And if you're successful, you are in somebody else's SBOM. So you're going to start getting phone calls and emails and LinkedIn messages, typically from somebody who maybe doesn't know what they're doing, saying, you broke my project, or you have to fix your problem, etc. You never have to fix anything, but you have to understand, what your relationship with your users is going to be. And with all this EU legislation, all this US legislation, people are paying attention to what's on the ingredient list. What's great is you right now, when you publish to GitHub, you have an SBOM for free, ready to go. So if you have your repository already, make sure you have dependency graph turned on, and you'll have access to these slides. Go click on the Insights button at the top. You then will go click on Dependency Graph on the left, and then click on Export SBOM on the right, and you'll end up with this big JSON file of URLs and whatnot that basically says, here's what you depend on. If you ever get asked for an SBOM, there you go. You'll also see here in the front page here, you can see all your open source dependencies, name, version, its licensing, and with dependency graph, you can see if there's problems, if there's known vulnerabilities. Again, this is what you'll be doing for the rest of your life is checking this page and updating as necessary. Uh, because probably, I don't know, 1%, 5% of all your dependencies are going to have a defect, a vulnerability at any time that you need to update. Um, and here's your one pager. Here's all, if you have not heard these acronyms before, you are now going to know more than 90% of open source folks that are out there and commercial folks that are out there. And it's good. We all need to know more about this, which is vulnerabilities have names. You might see that you might have seen this before, like CVE-2021-44228. That's just this is database ID for this security vulnerability. That's how we all talk about these. Oh my gosh, you got to upgrade because you're affected by CVE, blah, blah, blah. Or if you get a notice from your bank, sorry, we got hacked because of CVE-2021. Um, if it has a name vulnerability, almost certainly you should just upgrade it. You're going to spend all this time trying to figure out, is it exploitable? How bad is it? Et cetera, et cetera. In general, you're gonna want to fix it. Let Dependabot, which is a free tool for you for your public repos, just do the heavy lifting and upgrade it, et cetera. If you start working at a commercial company, you can start paying attention to triage and this and that and explaining. My general opinion is if it's got a CVE, go fix it. Just upgrade it. Um, they'll talk about how bad is it. That is like a CVSS score or EPSS score. There's all this debate which one's better, etc. General feeling is the higher the number, the worse it is. So CVSS, if it's a 10, uh, no one's going to have any patience for you dragging your feet, not fixing it. If it's a 1, may not even be known as a vulnerability. So this is what you need to know about vulnerabilities. Know how to look it up. Go out to like the data. Basically, if you take the CVE and you paste it into your search engine of choice, it'll bring you to more information you want to know about how it was found, how it's broken, etc. But in general, there'll be an an upgrade for whatever data, for whatever open source piece that you're using. You'll upgrade it. Might not be right away. And if you're running a commercial service or you're an open source project, you might need to figure out what you're going to do for the next day or week to keep your users safe or yourself safe. You might need to take the machine down. You might need to turn off functionality, etc. Okay, great tools. Go turn on Dependabot. Use some free tools like OpenSSF scorecards. There's a great resource out there that GitHub helps with called opensource.guide, which will distill what I've kind of told you in this last 45 minutes, an hour. Little more, a little slower, a little more details there. Great ways to get started. And now we'll talk about, these are some slides that you can take away, basically some checklists when you start ready to go. Get yourself ready to be open source superstar. Basically, get some files in your repositories, and GitHub has some great tools to create these files for you automatically. But have some files that scream out to the open source world. Who am I? That's my README. What's my code of conduct? Just like your roommates and who does the dishes. The code of conduct, you can go download some great ones that have been used by some open source projects that you got somebody who's a jerk, who's writing things in your issues or being mean to you on Discord or whatever. You get to point to the code of conduct and say, sorry, you can't do that. We're banning you. Or giving you another choice, etc. Too many projects wait too long to put that in place, and they have a really bad problem that causes their community to get fractured. My advice is don't wait for that event. Get ahead of it. Contributing, how people should contribute to you. This is super important these days with AI. You are going to be given access to Copilot and other AI tools. What really upsets open source projects is when people don't read the contributing and they start submitting patches to a project says, don't submit patches if you're using AI, or don't submit patches unless you do A, then B, then C, and then write the special sentence. Go read a contributing MD in every repo that you want to support and help so that you're not a jerk. The license, I've spent a lot of time talking about how important the license is. Go pick your license. GitHub will even put one in the data. When you create a repo, you can choose which license. Go to choosealicense.com for more information about that. Security MD, as you get more successful, how will people report security problems in your own repository? You don't want them to do it publicly. You want them to send you a private email or use a GitHub functionality called private vulnerability reporting, because you don't want the hackers to read about the vulnerability before you do. And then some other things, issue templates and pull request templates. Really important for you as new software people is to make it easy for the maintainers that you are contributing to. They're going to ask you, please put it in this format. Please give me this information. Please run these tests. Please give me this uh, 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 basically framework for working together. These are these templates for issues, for pull requests, etc. You can do that yourself to make your life a lot easier. And almost certainly you will if you get successful. You will say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I know about templates. Um, I mentioned that we have a great tool to help you. If you go to your repo right now and go, again, click on Insights, my favorite tab at the top, and go click on Community Standards, it'll show you what you have in your current repo, and it will help you add kind of vetted versions of code of conduct, contribution guidelines, security policies, etc. Great thing to do. And again, if you have any questions, contact me on Discord, etc. Some other files that you might be interested in, agents.md, support, funding, citation. These are all ways that as you can tell people how to give you credit if you're writing something for a scientific paper. Citation, how to cite you in their papers. Funding, how to make money. If you haven't looked already, go look at GitHub sponsors. Great way for people to give you money as an open source person. Great way to communicate that is through a funding MD file. So basically, all these files in your repo that AI agents know how to look for, humans know how to look for, and if you put them in there, you've made it a lot easier. Okay, last thing I'll talk about here, and then we can kind of do Q&A or other things, is when you put your repository together, there are certain things that are safe when it's just you. When you're not taking any code from the outside, you're not giving anybody else access to your repository. But there are 6 things that you can do today, tomorrow, you should do right away for any repositories that you're building. First off is put together a security MD file so people know how to contact you if there's a security problem. Do bear in mind, people might misuse that and try to get you to run something. So never trust anybody. It's just like when your phone rings and they say you're from your bank. Trust but verify. Same thing with any vulnerability reporting coming in. Turn on that private vulnerability reporting. Turn on secret scanning with push protection. One of the biggest ways people get hacked is they accidentally leak their password or their token in their repository. They're so excited with GitHub and Copilot and they're pushing and they're pushing and they're pushing. And next thing you know, your AWS token or Azure token or your database password gets lovingly checked into your public repository. Within seconds, that token or password will get stolen and misused. So secret scanning before it shows up in your repository will actually say, hey, do you really mean to push this into your repo? Probably not. Dependabot and dependency review. We talked about software bills of material and CVEs and all that. Dependabot is your friend. Go turn that on and it will do all that heavy lifting and work for you. CodeQL. This is code scanning. This is really good. So you're going to be running, maybe you're writing code, maybe you're getting code from a large language model. CodeQL will look at your source code and tell you if there's any vulnerabilities. And you can then go fix it. You can have Copilot go fix it. If somebody contributes code to you, really important to run this. Nobody else will be checking code besides you. Use CodeQL or similar scanners. And last thing is, as soon as you start having additional co-maintainers, you need to turn on this special thing called branch protection. And I'll mention to you here because if you don't get it up right, it's a great way of inviting basically hackers into your repository. So you're going to turn on branch protection with rule sets. There's a great article on the GitHub blog about how to do that. I can post that into Discord. But you do these 6 things, repo is so much safer than the average person's, and people can trust it. So with that, I really appreciate everybody kind of getting the fire hose of what it takes to be an open source author in 2026. Love to see if there's any questions. I don't see anything in the chat, but maybe on Discord, or if people just have any questions, etc. I can also do a demo if people have any questions about how to find these things in the repo, or if people are looking at their own repos and have questions. Have at it. Love to answer. This is your time. Any questions you have?
Jeff, as people are composing their questions, I just want to say how incredible this was. I feel like I learned so much. And when it comes to things like permissions and security, and all of like it. The topics themselves can feel incredibly overwhelming. They strike up a lot of like fear and, oh, if I'm not, I maybe I just won't look at it or I won't think
Yep,
about
yep,
it
yep,
and all.
yep.
And so what is so fantastic about what you've done today is I feel not just like I know so much more about these subjects and what questions to ask myself and what tools to use, but I also feel really encouraged by your attitude towards it, that it's very approachable. You can get your arms around it. There are people out there willing to help. And as much as we're all kind of living in constant fear of data breaches and
Yep,
identity
yep.
theft and all these other things, it's a great reminder that the majority of people want to share and do so in a good and helpful and productive way, and that most of us are not looking to exploit one another.
Yep, yep, yep.
And so, anyways, I just really appreciate that, and I think you can see from some of the reactions, people are hopefully
I
feeling
appreciate that.
really.
And I know it was a lot.
Yeah,
I expect this is to like say, oh, I know in the future I should think about
yeah,
these things, et cetera.
absolutely.
I work very closely with a lot of open source maintainers, and there's these things that people get into their career and they go, they kind of do this like, I got to tell you, I didn't learn about CVEs. I don't know about licensing. I am running one of the most important open source projects in the world, and I don't know about these topics. And I feel like I'm, this imposter syndrome, like, oh, what?
Yeah,
I'm going to screw it up for everybody.
absolutely.
So it's
Yeah,
great
yeah.
to do it from the very beginning. The materials are out there. People want to help out. I'll point you to the GitHub community, which is, you type that into GitHub, you'll see it. It's a discussion board. Um, Also, like I said, feel free to reach out to me. We'll get some good info in the Discord. I see Chris Mears said a demo would be great since there's a lot of rule sets, so we'll get to that in just a second. Um, and then what would you recommend for steps for being security compliant and having the correct license for GitHub beginners? Um, First thing I would say is those 6 steps that I mentioned at the end, and I believe it may show up in the slide, but I'll make sure you get it as well. So there's a great blog article that the security team from GitHub published this month, which was 6 settings to make your repository secure, or 6 settings that every GitHub maintainer should set up. You do that, you're in a really good place. You'll also want to make sure you have the two-factor authentication turned on, which I believe is now turned on for everybody. Um, Another thing, if you haven't seen this already, there's this thing called cooldown. Yep, perfect. Thanks so much. Um, More and more of the open source repository managers like NPM and PyPy are putting this idea of cooldown, which is they won't let you download an open source library that's less than, say, 3 days old or 6 days old. You may need to configure that for your local setup, but that's probably one of the most important things you can do on your desktop side of things so that you're not downloading this poisoned open source component. That's one of the big supply chain attacks for developers right now, is they say, oh, we'll break into some popular open source maintainers project, will replace their library with a poisoned version, and then a million people will download it tomorrow, before the scanners can find it. So what these communities have done is they put in this idea of a cooldown. Well, let's people can update things, but we're going to spend 3 days to kind of run scanners on all these things. So take a look at cooldown. Um, and from licensing, I think it's a kind of a philosophy. My general opinion, you're probably an MIT person, an Apache 2.0 person, or like a GPL person. Figure out your philosophy. MIT, a lot of the culture of like JavaScript world is short and sweet, attribution license. Get out of my way. I just want to write code. Apache 2.0 is more legalese. It's like an MIT license, but it says, oh, I got some discussions about patents and all this. A little more corporate, make corporations a little more comfortable, or traditionally it was. I think they're very comfortable with MIT. And then lastly is like, hey, am I an open source purist? Am I AGPL? Am I GPL? Am I working in the Linux community that I have to use GPL? I think that the license decision is really for you. I would look at the community you're in. If you're an NPM and you're making a node project, open source project, everybody there's MIT. If I'm in Rust, everybody there is either Apache or MIT. If I'm in Linux, it's GPL version 2. So that's what I would say, is look at your community. if you're going to build a company, think about your business model. But for most open source folks, MIT, Apache, GPL are kind of like the three that people look at. Um, let's see. Um, thank you for that. I'm not familiar with TV Maze. What is maybe I'll click on that. Hopefully, forgive me if it is something scary. Um, what I'm not quite sure what TV Maze. Not quite sure what's on there that's licensing, but we can take a look. I'll take a look later too.
And
Oh,
I
for exploring their licenses. Oh, perfect. I see that. I see that. So they have, do they disclose their licenses there? That would be great. Okay.
I also found a GitHub blog post about cooldown and making the case for it. So I'm going to drop
Perfect.
that into
Perfect.
the chat here as well, plus with our, I'll put it into the Discord. So.
Okay, perfect. And cooldown is great. Cooldown is very new as well. People are learning about it. I think it's a great thing to start fresh from, so that you're not bitten by a poison component. Um, Supply chain security is really interesting too. So if you're looking at looking at your career and looking at things to explore, this whole idea of open source and security and the supply chain and the tooling there, there's a lot of places to look there, tools to be built, tools to be used, ways to get jobs at companies. So just a thing to
Yeah,
look at
Jeff,
is
do you want
too.
to say something about your own kind of career path to the
Yeah,
work that
sure. Yeah, yeah.
you focused
Uh,
on? I think
I,
that might be interesting.
Yeah, I'm one of those odd, you talk to somebody and they have a very linear career. I'm not one of those folks. Though mine's not that unlinear, but I did engineering school. I graduated with a engineering degree. It was not computer science. It was industrial engineering, simulation, statistics. But I got a job at NASA. And I flew out from the East Coast to California and I did 6 years of scientific software, basically plotting graphs from research and whatnot. And it was interesting, really very cool. And then the dot-com boom was exploding, and I said I better get a dot-com job. This is in the late '90s. I better do that and not feel like I missed out on something. Perhaps a little bit like the
Unlike
AI
me
boom right
leaving my
now.
PhD to go get a data science job in 2013, 2014.
Exactly, exactly. He's like, I better not miss out on this. And I got, I believe, what was the last dot-com job in the world, and the economy proceeded to explode. But I had my job, and they had money for like 2 or 3 years. And I did that. I did Java programming. I was a classic, write software, but also did a little bit with our sales, a little bit with our support. Did a lot of mentoring, which I found, everybody's different. Everybody asks for career advice, and I'm like, well, I don't know if this helps you. This was my path. I found kind of, being a good, I was always good at like explaining things to people, or hopefully, or understanding security, how does security and usability impact folks. And I kind of found myself, being a person who'd go with the salespeople with the software, how to install it, explain it, etc. And I also saw that we had a problem. The company I was working for, had a license violation. It was very serious that caused a lot of rework, probably 6 months of rework, because we couldn't sell the company, we couldn't sell the product very easily with this huge open source problem in it. And this is when people were getting sued left and right over GPL violations and things. And then that company went out of business. It was the end of the dot-com bit. And I said, I'm gonna build a company. I didn't have a family, didn't, I was young enough, I was like, and the economy stunk. I was like, well, I'm not gonna get a job. Let's build a job. And I was lucky. And I was also like, had some folks from the previous company and had access to some of the investors and got basically an angel investor through luck in some ways. And we built a company and then got VC money from Silicon Valley, from Sand Hill Road, got a Series A and then a Series B and a Series C, built a company, did it for 16 years. I thought I'd be done in like 4 years. And then we eventually sold the company. And that was interesting. They checked our source code for licensing. And uh, once that was done, I started kind of doing this. I've been working for OSPOs ever since then because I love this idea of helping people use open source, doing the right thing, keeping things secure, especially with the software security side. And now I'm now here at GitHub. And so I work on a very small team and I work closely with our lawyers. I work closely with our software developers, like closely with our outside developer relations folks. I work with the open source projects, the foundations as well. And it's just a great kind of like, some people like jobs that are just like, I like writing code. I like these jobs where I have a million different things. Someday I'm
Yeah.
writing blogs, someday I'm writing code, someday I'm trying to track down money to pay a software developer. So it's been fun.
Great. We have to wrap here
Yep.
because we have another workshop starting in under a minute. So I want to make sure I get that Zoom room opened up for people. Feel free to emoji and thank Jeff, and we'll look forward, Jeff, to you joining us on the Discord. And all this material we'll be posting. So thank you again so much. What a
I really
tremendous.
appreciate everybody's time and patience and attention today. And we'll talk to you soon. And good luck with this thing. And like I said, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd love to help, be any help I can. Talk to you soon.
Great.
Thanks
Thank you
again.
so much. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.